This
Session.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of information to go through today, so we're just going to get started and right into it. My name is Dan Gallagher, and I am a field consultant with the Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association. As a field consultant, I try to provide guidance, information, and support to the people who provide recreational services in Saskatchewan. In addition to these responsibilities, I help administer the SPRA Framework and Action Grant, which is why we are here today. Before we begin, I now like to acknowledge that SPRA's programs, services, and support reach lands covered by the 6 treaties identified on your screen, the traditional territories of the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Lakota, Nakota, and Saulteaux people, and the homeland of the Métis. At the Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association, we envision a province in which all people have equitable access to recreation experiences that contribute to their health and well-being, result in connected and engaged community members, and provide connection and attachment to the natural environment. We provide leadership, support, and services that contribute to recreation's impact on the quality of life for people in Saskatchewan. You can learn more about us and our work on our website or by following the Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. SPRA is empowered through funding by Saskatchewan Lotteries. SPRA manages the recreation section of the Saskatchewan Lotteries Trust for sport, culture, and recreation. To participate in today's session, please save your questions until the end of the presentation, at which time you can turn your microphone and camera on and ask away. Feel free to keep your camera on throughout the session, but please keep yourself muted until it's time to ask your question at the end. If you like, you have the ability to modify your view to see only the active speaker or the entire group. You can also view a list of today's participants. Utilize the chat function to chat with your fellow participants and to ask questions. Please note, we will not be using the raise hand feature. Lastly, if you are having any technical issues during today's presentation, indicate that in the chat, and Christian will reach out to you. In addition, the session will be recorded and will be made available to all those registered via email after the session. This is the agenda for today's session. I will start with providing some background information about the framework, what it is, and why it's important. Having a better understanding of the framework should help you in the application process. Then I'll briefly chat about what's happening in Saskatchewan in regards to the framework and how SPRA has been supporting the framework. Then I'll discuss the Framework and Action Grant. Things I'll cover will include the purpose of the grant, who is eligible, eligible expenditures, amount available, and funding requirements. I'll also go over some frequently asked questions like how and where do I apply, and when will I find out if my application was approved. I'll share some success stories from past recipients of the grant with the intent to inspire your own applications. I'll mention some additional tools and resources in support of the framework. And at the end, I will take your questions as time allows. So please, again, save your questions until the end of the presentation. When we speak about the framework, what are we referring to? This all stems from a paper called A Framework for Recreation in Canada, 2015, Pathways to Wellbeing. Published in 2015, A Framework for Recreation in Canada, Pathways to Wellbeing is a document that provides a new vision for recreation. The paper was designed to guide and stimulate coordinated practices in recreation throughout Canada to improve the well-being of individuals, communities, and built and natural environments. It suggests recreation has the potential to address many socio-demographic challenges and issues facing Canadians, like sedentary behavior, obesity, decreased contact with nature, threats to the environment, and inequities that limit participation. Addressing these issues requires commitment to a shared vision, values, and goals of recreation. This shared vision, values, and goals is essentially what we refer to as the framework. The framework has 5 goals, which are active living, inclusion and access, connecting people and nature, supportive environments, and recreation capacity. For myself, I like to think that by addressing the goals of the framework, we can help ensure people will experience the benefits of recreation. The framework is a call to action, inviting leaders and stakeholders across sectors to collaborate in pursuit of positive change for recreation in Canada. And it has been endorsed by the Government of Canada, provincial and territorial ministers, the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, provincial and territorial parks and recreation associations, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The framework has redefined what recreation means, resulting in a definition that is more broad and accepting of what is considered recreation. The definition reads, recreation is the experience that results from freely chosen participation in physical, social, intellectual, creative, and spiritual pursuits that enhance individual and community well-being. The framework has 5 goals, and each goal has multiple priorities. The 5 goals include active living, inclusion and access, connecting people and nature, supportive environments, and recreation capacity. By addressing the goals and priorities of the framework, it helps ensure everyone will experience the benefits of recreation. Being aware and understanding the 5 goals of the framework and their priorities will assist you in your Framework in Action Grant application, as your program or initiative must show alignment with a goal and a priority. The goal of active living aims to foster active living through physical recreation. The goal of inclusion and access aims to increase inclusion and access to recreation for populations that face constraints to participation. The goal of connecting people and nature aims to help people to connect them with nature through recreation. The goal of supportive environments aims to ensure there are physical and social environments that encourage participation in recreation to build strong and caring communities. And the goal of recreation capacity aims to ensure the continued growth and sustainability of the recreation field. This mostly speaks to supporting the leaders in recreation, whether they are volunteers or staff. Priorities for action. From my perspective, the priorities provide further clarity to the goals of the framework and the actions that can be taken to address the goals. For example, the framework goal of supportive environments is to ensure there are physical and social environments that encourage participation in recreation to build strong and caring communities. A priority within that goal is to work with partners to increase the use of existing structures and spaces for multiple purposes, including recreation. So an example of that is the town of Indian Head. They created a new park on a vacant lot called the Constable Shelby Patton Memorial Park. It was created in honor of Constable Shelby Patton, who was killed in the line of duty in June 2021. The park includes outdoor exercise equipment for adults, a gazebo area, and a children's play structure that looks like an RCMP police car complete with decals. So, what is happening in Saskatchewan in support of the framework? Well, the framework has had an influence on the planning conducted by municipalities and other organizations. For example, the framework has influenced the creation of rec master plans created by municipalities. A recreation master plan is a strategic document that provides direction to the organization. It may answer those what and where questions, but it will also answer the why. From a community perspective, a benefit of having a rec master plan is that it helps guide decision making. A good plan reflects input from the community as a whole, not just the loudest voice. And the last I checked, there were 11 rec master plans in Saskatchewan. Um, 10 of them referenced the framework, and there were 4 more still in development. If you plan to create a rec master plan, it's good to know why it's important to include the framework in the plan. Some benefits of including the framework in a plan is that it builds credibility to your rec master plan. It aligns local interests with provincial and federal interests, which may have implications when it comes to funding, and it strengthens the argument and justification for supporting parks and recreation in Canada. And SPRA has been supporting the framework a number of ways. SPRA's strategic plan reflects the goals and priorities of the framework. SPRA's vision is aligned with the framework. And a few years ago, SPRA hosted the Framework Forum Conference, whereby people all across Canada attended. And finally, SPRA offers the Framework in Action Grant to advance the goals and priorities of the framework. So I want to thank you for listening up to this point. I believe it was important to try and educate everyone on the framework because the purpose of the Framework and Action Grant is to advance the goals and priorities within the framework. Also, please note, as I speak about the Framework and Action Grant, most of the information that I'm going to cover can be found within the Framework and Action Grant brochure, which is located on the SPRA Grants and Funding page. And for your awareness, the Framework and Action Grant is one of the newer SPRA member initiative grants. It was first offered in 2020, and since then it has supported 41 initiatives with close to $100,000 being allocated. Eligibility. The SPRA Framework and Action Grant, like all member initiative grants, are only available to active members of SPRA. Eligible active members include cities, towns, villages, rural municipalities, First Nation communities, provincial recreation associations, sport, culture, and recreation districts, tribal councils, Métis regions, and regional urban park authorities. But note, sport, culture, and recreation districts are not eligible for this grant because they already receive funding from the Framework and Action Grant specifically meant for districts. SPRA membership must be current, and to find out who the active SPRA member is in your community, contact our office if you don't know that already. And in addition, you can't have any outstanding follow-ups from other SPRA member initiative grants, Sask Lottery Community Grant programs, or the Saskatchewan Lottery Trust Fund. If you are unsure you have any outstanding grants, you can contact our grants and funding consultant. Available assistance. Applicants can apply for grants up to a maximum of $5,000. Preference will be given to those that show self-help, i.e. self-generated funds, donations in kind, and other revenue. A maximum of one application will be accepted from an active SPRA member. So if you have multiple ideas about what you want to apply for, be sure to just send us one application. Initiatives will not be funded retroactively. Any initiative that has begun prior to the application deadline of April 10th will not be considered. And new initiatives are encouraged as the grant is not able to provide sustainable funding. Previously funded opportunities will receive a lower priority due to the availability of funds in the grant. Ineligible expenditures. The following items are considered ineligible: capital expenses, assistance for the construction, renovation, or repair of capital facility projects such as arenas, pools, parks, athletic fields, trails, buildings, grounds, etc. Food-related expenses, so things that go towards banquets, dinners, fundraising, and celebrations. Subsidization of wages for full-time employees. However, additional staff hired to implement the program is eligible. Property taxes and insurance are ineligible. Alcoholic beverages, cash prizes, including gift cards, out of province travel, and uniforms or personal items such as hats or sweatbands. The application requirements. When you fill out an application form, we will be asking the following things: contact information, proposal details, desired outcomes, a budget, and an action plan. For the contact information, this is the name of the active member and the contact person applying for the grant. The proposal will be a detailed proposal of the initiative or activity and the framework goal and priority being addressed. It is important to be clear about what you intend to do. We will ask what your outcomes will be and the indicators to show how the outcomes will be measured. To clarify, outcomes are the desired changes or benefits you'll see as a result from your activity, i.e., participants may learn a new skill. And indicators are the ways that will help you measure your desired outcome. So an example would be you would count the participants in the program. The application will ask for a budget. The proposed budget must have a list of revenues and expenditures related to your activity or initiative. Revenues and expenditures must balance. Revenues must include the Framework and Action Grant request, any other grants, fees you might have, or self-help you may have. Expenditures must include expenditures related to the activity, initiative that you're applying for. So it's very important that there are enough eligible expenditures within your budget that can be covered by the requested grant amount. And an action plan. This is like a brief to-do list, if you want, with timelines with the things that you need to do in order to carry out your planned activity or initiative. An application checklist. So when you fill out your application, you should ensure the following: your membership is active, your expenditures are eligible, you are submitting a balanced budget, you completed all sections of the application, you checked all the declarations in the application, and all of your outstanding grants are closed. Funding obligations. If you get approved for funding, you must use the funds within 10 months of the application deadline. And again, the application deadline is April 10th. All funds must be used for the purpose stated in the application. If there's going to be a change in the use of funds, SPRA must approve in writing any significant change in the use of funds. Unused funds or funds spent incorrectly must be returned to SPRA, and where possible, please recognize Sask Lotteries. And follow-up requirements. A follow-up is required within 30 days of completing your initiative. Your follow-up must include evidence as to how one of the goals of the framework was addressed. Your follow-up must include a final budget and verification of expenditures. Verification of expenditures can be in the form of copies of actual receipts, canceled checks, or a schedule from the audited financial statement of the organization. But most often, people send us copies of receipts because it's the easiest thing to do. And just like the application, the follow-up is done online through the online grant portal. And when it comes to SPRA grants, we get some frequently asked questions. I will go over a few of them in the next couple of slides. One question we often get is my program eligible for a member initiative grant? Be sure to read and understand the eligibility criteria, available assistance, ineligible expenditures, and application process featured within the Framework and Action Grant brochure found on the SPRA website. If you still have questions, feel free to contact us. Also, please keep in mind that projects will not be funded retroactively, meaning any project that has begun prior to the application deadline date will not be considered. And again, the application deadline date is April 10th. And from my perspective, the Framework and Action Grant is open to a wide variety of programs and initiatives. This is because there can be many different ways to address the goals of the framework. So again, read and understand the eligibility criteria, ineligible expenditures, the application process described in the grant brochure. And if you still have questions, feel free to contact me. And another question we hear often is, where can applications be submitted? All member initiative grant applications can be found on the SPRA online grant platform. Only electronic applications will be accepted up to the end of the day when each grant closes. So again, April 10th is the application deadline for the Framework and Action Grant. The online grant platform is located on the SPRA website. So to get there, click the Our Grants link under the Grants and Funding tab. New users to the online grant platform will need to create a username and a password to access any of the SPRA member initiative grants. Existing or previous users can simply enter their username and password to access the platform. If login information has been lost, or if further information or clarification is needed for a specific grant, please contact the SPRA Grants and Funding Consultant. Another question we hear is, how much information about my program should be included in the application? Well, the more information, the better. Please include specific information that pertains to your program, such as detailed description, how the need was determined, what are your desired outcomes, an action plan, and how you plan to evaluate the program or initiative. A detailed description describes what you plan to do. For example, do you plan to do a Learn to event? Is it a senior rec programming? Or are you creating a volunteer handbook for operating the concession? Be clear on what you intend to do. Avoid describing how great your program is, but then forgetting to tell us what you actually plan to do. Tell us how the need for your program was determined. This describes how you decided the program initiative you want to do is a good idea. For instance, did the public come to you with the idea? Did you ask the people in your community what they wanted? Did your rec board or council identify it as a need? Also, tell us the outcomes you hope to achieve. This describes the benefit you will see from having the program or initiative. For example, if you're doing a Learn to event, some outcomes could be one, participants will become more aware about how to participate in the activity. Or another outcome could be participants will become more confident and comfortable to participate in the activity. And the action plan. This describes the work you need to do to make the program or initiative happen. This shows us you put some thought into the work needed to make your program or initiative a success. And how your program will be evaluated. How are you going to evaluate your program or initiative? Will participants complete a short survey? Will you count the number of participants? If you are doing a survey, try to ask questions that will measure your desired outcomes. For example, if an outcome for a Learn to event was participants will become more aware about how to participate in the activity, then ask them in the survey, did you become more aware about how to participate in the activity in your community? Or another example would be if an outcome was participants will become more confident and comfortable to participate in the activity, then ask them in the survey, are you more confident and comfortable participating in the activity? Please contact me if you have questions about outcomes and measuring outcomes. I can help you identify desired outcomes and how to measure them. Another frequently asked question is, what is a balanced budget and what does it look like? A balanced budget is where your program revenues and expenses are equal once your program concludes. When submitting a grant application, be sure to always forward a balanced budget. During this process, be sure to also review the listing of ineligible expenditures found within each grant brochure. Any expense listed within your budget that is considered ineligible, such as capital expenses or costs related to food, will need to be covered by your self-help funds and not by the grant. Another question is, if approved for a grant, when would funds be issued and how will we find out? Applications will be reviewed approximately 3 weeks after the deadline date, and applicants will be notified the outcome of their application approximately 4 weeks after the deadline date. The initial 75% of the grant will be issued to the active member listed on the application and sent out with an approval letter, while the remaining 25% will be sent out upon receipt and acceptance of the follow-up report. Another question is, if approved, when does the grant need to be used by? If approved for a grant, all funds must be used within 10 months of the application deadline date. Within this time frame, your program must be completed and the follow-up report submitted for review. So far, we have reviewed the framework, what it is, and information about the grant itself. Now it's time to share some success stories from the past recipients of the grant. The intent here is to give you ideas and to inspire you for your own grant application. The first success story is from the City of North Battleford. Staff from the City of North Battleford Parks and Recreation Department identified a need to make better use of their outdoor programming spaces. As a result, a variety of programs were offered in the fall and winter of 2020-2021, including eco education, outdoor Indigenous games, and snow sculpting. Funding from the Framework in Action Grant enabled the city to deliver these programs free of charge, while the city ensured they were held in accessible, easy to reach locations and applicable for all ages. This ensured Goal 2 of the framework was addressed: inclusion and access. The programs were well received in the community and were a good alternative to traditional programming. The programs gave families a chance to participate in activities together without traveling far from their homes, and they were able to discover and explore new facilities and areas in their community. A great example is the snow sculpting at the Ellen Sapp Gallery. This attracted a lot of attention from visitors who may not normally visit an art gallery. International award-winning snow sculptor Patricia Leguin carved a snow sculpture in front of the gallery called Mighty Bison. As she worked, she explained her process, and participants were encouraged to join in and ask questions. Another success story comes from the town of Rosthern. It was determined in the winter of 2020 by the town of Rosthern Town Council that a community recreation needs assessment was necessary in order to gather input and provide direction for the Rosthern Rec Department to assist with short and long-term planning. With the development of a new school in the community, the town of Rosthern acquired ownership and operation of the old elementary school gym. This meant increased potential for programming and hosting different events. The Framework in Action grant allowed Rosthern to collect input from the community on their recreation needs, and the data collected was meant to help decision makers with addressing recreation needs in the community for years to come. And this addressed the framework goal of recreation capacity. Another success story comes from the city of Melfort. In 2016, the local Rotary Club in Melfort installed a 9-hole disc golf course at one of the local parks. Ever since the city of Melfort was looking to encourage use of the park and the disc golf course. The city recognized disc golf as an active recreation experience good for families and an easy to play sport for kids and adults. To help encourage the use of the park and the disc golf course, the city applied and received support from the Framework in Action grant to host a Learn to Play disc golf event and to purchase a disc golf set for people to borrow at no cost. This reduced barriers to participation. This addressed the framework goal of active living, but it also addressed the goal of inclusion and access. Another success story comes from the town of Kerrobert. Kerrobert's park and green spaces have been built and managed by volunteers for many years. But the town recognized the volunteers will not be around forever, and when they leave, so does their knowledge about the care and maintenance of their parks. To help retain this knowledge, the town of Kerrobert received funding from the Framework in Action grant to support the creation of a parks care and maintenance resource. And this activity addressed the framework goal of recreation capacity. Here are a few more examples of communities and organizations that received funding from the Framework in Action grant. The Saskatchewan Association of Rec Professionals and their SARP conference and AGM. The Village of St. Louis also did a Learn to Play disc golf event. Ben Golf did some senior programming. The town of Pilot Butte hosted a Learn to Play horseshoes event. The city of Lloydminster offered a no-cost programming for families in need. The city of Humboldt hosted a Learn to Row event. And Spiritwood did a physical activity program for kids age 3 to 6. If you want to learn more about the framework or are interested in some tools and resources, the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association website is the place to visit. There you will find a copy of the framework document. There is a framework alignment tool, which helps evaluate how well aligned your organization or community is with the framework. And there's something called the bench. The bench includes discussion groups, a resource library, and events page related to Parks and Recreation. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions after the presentation. And that's basically it for the presentation. I believe we probably have some time for questions now at the end. But before I take any questions, I just want to say this is the first time that we've actually done a presentation like this about SPRI grants and funding. So we really appreciate your feedback on how it went. So please be sure to take the time to fill out the evaluation form that we're going to send to you after the presentation today. So I'm just going to click out of here. And stop sharing my screen. All right, I think I stopped sharing my screen now. So yeah, I think we have some time to take some questions. So if anybody has any questions about the Framework in Action grant, I'm willing to take them and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. And if I have to come back to you later on, then I will. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. And I see Shannon, you're moving your hand. So
Hi,
go.
can you hear
Hi,
me?
how are you? Yeah, I can hear
Good, how
you.
are you? Good.
Good.
I have one, what, not super related to the grant, but do we know, are they working on an update for the framework? 2015 was a day or two ago. Like, obviously, we're going to work within these parameters, but do you know if there's an update on the recreation framework coming?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that there was some work on that because there was a RFP that went out for people to for someone to actually look at the framework itself and look to see if there's any updates that were required. But details on that I don't really have, but I can
Okay,
do a
no
little
worries.
bit of digging on that and then get back to you if you're interested, Shannon.
Yeah, no worries. And then my only other one was, have you guys had successful applications in the connecting people to nature or supportive environments? We obviously got
Um,
that active living one, and so I'm looking to apply again, but maybe for a different stream.
right.
And I'm just wondering if you
Uh,
have any examples of those.
That's a good question again. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any. But again, with the Framework and Action Grant, it's pretty wide open as to a lot of different programs and initiatives to apply for it. So um, let me take a look and see what has happened in the past. And if I can find anything, I can share that with you, Shannon.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, I have a quick question. I'm Sarah Van Eaton from Merrifield Recreation. I'm just in my vehicle, so I've had bad service here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Hey, I was wondering, we are looking at getting snowmobile trails up and going. We don't have any that are pre-existing, and I'm wondering if you think putting some of this funding towards a possible snowmobile shack, like warm-up shed, would qualify.
Right. So a shack itself, I don't think would actually be eligible just with
Okay.
the eligible criteria because one of the ineligible expenditures goes
Yeah.
towards capital. And so
Okay.
that would probably be capital. So unfortunately, I don't think it would be eligible.
Okay, do you think that the signage and kind of stuff that we basically need to get this going would qualify? It actually takes quite a fair bit of signage, more than we realized.
Okay. A good question about the signage, if it's eligible or not.
Yeah.
Um, it may be,
Okay.
I would suggest maybe afterwards we'll have a chat about
Sure.
that because I feel like it could be.
Okay.
But I don't want to speak in
Yeah,
case
no
I'm wrong.
problem.
So
Yeah, it's been tough to sort of find out if that can qualify.
yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Now, does anybody else have any questions? I don't see everybody on the screen here, so.
Hey Dan, we've had a couple questions come in the chat. If you don't mind answering a few questions from the chat.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Do you want to read those
Okay.
question out from the chat?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't sure if you can hear me or not. I was because of my microphone problems earlier. Yes,
Yeah.
so we have a question asking, how is the framework grant different from the regular member initiative grants? Also, could you elaborate about the seniors programming offered in Bengoff?
Okay. So a couple questions there. How is it different than the member initiative grants was the first one.
Yes.
Really, it is another member initiative grant, and a lot of the criteria for the grant, as far as like what's eligible for expenditures, for all the member initiative grants are basically the same. So as far as that is concerned, it's similar. The difference would be in regards to the purpose of the grant. The purpose of the Framework in Action grant is meant to support the framework itself. So that's how it's different. And the other difference is that the framework in action, the framework and the 5 goals and all their priorities, they're pretty broad. So as far as what could be applied for in the Framework in Action grant, it's really, as long as you're addressing those goals of the framework, there's lots of different activities to do that. So it's pretty broad based as to what you can apply for the framework. So I would say that would be another difference as well. And then there was another part to that question, and I forget what it was already. So you have to remind me, Christian.
It was about seniors programming offered by Bengoff. If you could elaborate on
Okay,
that a
yeah,
little bit.
right. So I'm going by memory here, and this was like 3 years ago. So I just know that the town of Bengoff, I think they hosted a seniors programming and in one of their buildings, and it was maybe once a week or something like that. The activities they did, I'm not too sure about, but I believe some of the funding went to help uh, pay for like an instructor that would be responsible for that programming. And then there might have been some other things, but they don't come to mind right now. So I would have to look into that and get more details.
Great, thank you. I know Andrew turned his camera on earlier. Andrew, did you have a question for Dan?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I'm just looking for a little bit more information. I know you mentioned that wages were eligible. Are there any restrictions around that?
Good question, Andrew. So as far as wages are concerned, it can't go towards like what did I say? Full-time wages like people you have on already, but it can't go towards supporting the program itself. So if you have to hire, sorry, if you want to do a program or initiative and you need to hire like an instructor, for example, to deliver it, then from what I can see here, it would be eligible, but it can't subsidize like wages for employees you have on already, if that makes
Is
sense.
there a maximum amount it could subsidize, like based off percentage? Could you cover 100% of a wage, or is it like a 75% cover or something like that?
Right. So a question like that, I actually don't know offhand. I'd have to look into it and just double check. Okay.
Thank you.
We've had some more questions come in the chat, Dan.
Sure.
Let's go to, there were actually a couple questions about learn to play projects like disc golf. Can you apply for the build or purchasing of the disc golf and its equipment to make it available for free to users?
Okay, so that's another good question. Um, so as far as like building the actual, like the nets have the chains come down and that sort of thing, and installing them, so that would probably be considered more capital and would not be eligible. But in the past, we've supported groups that have actually purchased the equipment. So like the disc golf sets themselves. And then also if there was a group that could come in and do some instructions on how to use the disc golf sets, we supported that as well.
Okay, that's great. There was actually a follow-up question related to, can the funding be applied to hire like instructors to teach the game?
Yeah, most definitely. So we've supported that in the past, and I know like Melford's done it. So like, hi Shannon, you guys did that. Village of St. Louis, I think, did that as well more recently. So that seems to be a popular one. Disc golf seems to be popping up all over, and so if we can get more people using those facilities and getting outside, then that's probably all the better. So. Um, is there any more questions on the chat there, Christian?
Yes, actually, we do have one other question that we haven't addressed yet. You mentioned that wages on additional staff is eligible through the grant. Does this extend as well to contracting a service group or nonprofit club to help deliver a program or event that meets framework criteria?
I'm getting lots of questions on that. So that's another good question. I'm gonna have to double check with Casey on how that would actually work. So, and Casey's our grants and funding consultant, if you guys don't know already. So I just want to, I'm hesitant to answer that question. I just want to make sure I get the information right. So if I'll just confirm with her, and then I think maybe in the follow-up email or whatever we sent out, I can maybe answer that question because that seems like a pretty popular question. So if that's okay.
I've just shared your email address in the chat there, so that anybody who has any questions related to framework funding can follow up with you. Additionally, I've got a couple questions coming in about the video recording and the slide deck, and I can confirm that yes, we will be sending out a recording of today's session tomorrow, along with all the slides that Dan shared and a participant survey, which we would ask that everybody in the session please fill out and give us your feedback. This is the first webinar we've ever had talking about one of our member initiative grants, and if it's popular and people find value in it, it's perhaps something we can do more often. So that feedback is very valuable. Additionally, so that the video and the slides will be sent out to everyone here that registered today, but it'll also be available on our website for anybody who wasn't able to attend the session. Dan, we had another question just come in. Would this grant possibly cover bringing in consultants on how to develop a community recreation plan?
Okay, yeah. Good question again. I would lean towards yes, because that particular item would really hit home like your recreation capacity goal and how to include the framework in your rec master plan. So I would lean towards yes on that one. Uh, and that's really encouraging to hear if a community is actually interested in building a rec master plan, because that really helps your organization or your community with the direction of where recreation should go and how it should be serviced in your community. So uh, I really like hearing those kind of things. So thumbs up for whoever gave that question.
I have had another question come in, but again, I want to reiterate that if anybody wants to, feel free to just turn your camera and your microphone on and just ask away. Um, are municipalities who have never received funding through this grant given priority?
Um, it's more so about I don't want to say if they give priority or not, but I think on one of the slides I mentioned that um, this grant is not meant to be for ongoing funding because the funding levels that we have is not, I don't want to say secure, but it can fluctuate from year to year. So this is not a grant that you should really count on from year to year because our funding levels will fluctuate every year. But It's really based on like that. And then the other thing is like if you're meeting the criteria of the grant and within the application.
I'm not seeing any other questions come up in the chat as of yet. We do have 9 minutes left in the session. Oh, here's another one. Do you have any contacts for consultants who could help develop a recreation master plan?
Yes, I can send that to you afterwards. So whoever asked that question, I could definitely share that information out.
I will also
And
mention that on our blog, we have written by Dan a blog post from a few months ago, maybe even a year ago now, about developing a recreation master plan. There are a number of communities in Saskatchewan that have done it, and we've sort of published those stories as case studies on how it's been done in the past. But Dan can give you more information about that.
yeah, and I'll say about the list of consultants I have that can help with a rec master plan. Now, I have to say it's not an exhaustive list. It's just a list of people I happen to know or heard of that have done this type of thing before. So I can share that with you, and then uh, you can take it from there. So, are there any other questions, either in the chat or?
Dan, I just wanted to say too, like there was some questions about disc golf. We got that active living one for disc golf. I'm willing to talk to anybody that might have questions about like how we applied for it, why we applied for it, how successful it was, because it's been huge in Melfort. And actually, I'm bringing out Disc Golf Saskatchewan again this summer to do an advanced learn to play day because it just really helped kick off the popularity of that activity in our community, which was the whole purpose. So I've applied for a different revenue stream for that, but yeah. So if anybody's interested.
That's awesome, Shannon. Really appreciate that. Whenever we can get people talking to each other and sharing success stories like that, I think it helps everybody out. So everybody call Shannon if you have questions about disc golf. She was willing to take your call. So, well, is there any other questions either on the chat or live?
Hey,
Hello.
Shannon. Hi, it's Sarah Van Eaton again from Maryfield. Shannon, could I get you just to drop your email address in the chat? I really would like to get this golf going here.
Yeah, for sure. I'll drop it in there and my phone number. Mine's super easy. It's pool@melfort.ca, so not hard.
Oh, that's
Because I'm
perfect.
in
Yeah.
recreation and aquatics, but I'll put it in there. And Dan, I can probably send it to you too. So if you wanna, I don't know if anybody wants to. If they don't hear from me or don't see it, they can reach out. I'm easy to get a hold of. Not hard to
Awesome.
find.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
you bet.
That's great. I think I have Sharon's email myself, so I could even like do a connection between you and Shannon if you want. So most definitely. All right. Are we seeing any more questions on the chat, Christian?
No, nothing's coming in.
All right. I'm not really seeing any more questions with people in the session. So maybe I've answered all of the questions. And
And I
I
think
know there was,
the only other,
sorry,
sorry, Dan, I just wanted to say thank you to you and Christian for putting this on. This grant, this one, and I would have loved to see one for the Parks for All. They're just so broad spectrum that sometimes it helps to get on, just have a quick chat about them, help narrow them down. Everybody in recreation is so crazy busy. We need the funding, but sometimes unless we have a narrowed focus, we just need a little hand on that. So appreciate it.
appreciate those comments, Shannon. Keep them coming.
Yeah, that
So,
feedback is extremely helpful, and we'll definitely take that to Andrew and the other consultants that are helping the Parks for All grant.
yeah.
Okay, Dan, I think that's probably everything. We can wrap up today's session.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to say thank you everyone for showing the interest on coming on today's grant. Uh, it gave me an opportunity to really kind of educate you guys about the framework itself a little bit. And so hopefully you learned something from that, and maybe you have some ideas now for your own framework and action grant. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and we can have a chat. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.